Hi, everyone. Welcome to 10-Minute Talks. I'm Harshadeva.
Today, I'm joined by Dr. Larry Schooler, Assistant Professor of Practice at the University of Texas at Austin, an experienced mediator and facilitator with over 15 years of experience in conflict resolution and public engagement. He helps individuals and communities resolve difficult conflicts, strengthen collaboration, and create positive change.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. Thank you very much for joining me today. Let's get started. My first question is as artificial intelligence continues to advance, there is huge potential for using it in conflict management, including mediation effort. But the question is, how can we utilize AI without losing the human connection, empathy, and vulnerability that are necessary for genuine conversation?
Well, Harsha, thank you first of all for having me on. I'm delighted to be with you. It's a fascinating question because I confess that I have been very surprised, some pleasantly surprised, some maybe not, by the incredible power that AI and artificial intelligence have displayed relatively early in their history, in their development. And so I'm sure that there may be colleagues of mine who believe that an entire mediation could be conducted with AI, with a chat bot of some sort, rather than with a human who is being, compensated for their time and so on. From my perspective, I think you're correct that a lot of the elements of conflicts being resolved have to do with the what I'll call the personal touch. And you referenced empathy. There is almost nothing more important in resolving a conflict than the display of empathy. In my classes, I describe it as the feeling of being heard or being seen. And that doesn't require someone to agree with a person or to think they're correct. Simply to say, I understand how you feel. I hear you. I see you. And a chatbot, of course, cannot do such a thing. Um, my courses that I teach in conflict resolution are in the School of Communication for good reason, because it's, in my opinion, nearly impossible to resolve a conflict without some form of communication. And sometimes we exacerbate conflict in how we communicate, and sometimes we exacerbate it by not communicating, by, so to speak, ghosting someone. Uh, and we also can bring peace by stepping back, and deliberately deciding to be silent or pausing the conversation. So I guess what I would say is that I think AI has the potential to help parties who are in conflict to think of ways out of the conflict that they might not otherwise think of. For example, if someone is holding a grudge against another person over something that has happened some time ago, and they can't think of a way to reconcile, you could imagine AI could at least harvest the knowledge available to it to provide suggestions, the same way that many of us might use AI for suggestions on travel or suggestions on restaurants or suggestions on TV shows. I mean, we're all, I'm sure, using it in a crazy variety of ways. Um, but I think there's a big difference between surrendering all agency to a machine compared to getting input from a machine. And in that way, I don't think that AI is that different from some of the technology we've had up to now. It's just that I think a lot of the AI platforms have made it much easier to understand some of what's out there and communicate about it in a way that feels a little bit more natural, a little bit more human. So I'm open to the idea that someone could put in the contours of a conflict that they're in to an AI platform and get some suggestions of how to see their way through the conflict to a resolution. But I still think that those suggestions, that advice needs to be deployed in the presence of human beings communicating with one another. I mean, I dare say that most people probably haven't resolved many conflicts over text messaging or over email or letter. They may have made an overture in those mediums, but they probably haven't gotten full resolution in those contexts. I think it takes real-time conversation, whether it's over video or in person or on the telephone. And so I think that AI can give us some seeds to plant for potentially getting the conflict resolved, but the actual harvest, I think, has to take place with two people communicating in real time.
This one, workplace conflict is everywhere, Dr. Larry. And then in my life, I haven't seen a workplace without conflict.
Hmm.
So, but how can we as co-workers deal with so-called bad people, mm, who use manipulation, mislead others, or act as spoilers? How can
Hmm.
we handle these kind of situations?
It's a wonderful question, and you're right. I mean, I think any organization made up of humans is going to have conflict. It's part of our, bloodstream, our DNA. It's not something that can be, in my opinion, entirely avoided or prevented. I think that there are a variety of ways to potentially limit the negative effects, though, of conflict. And one of them, I think, is in the process of bringing a new person into the team. And that even starts, I think, before they are offered the position. I think sometimes companies or organizations might be so eager, maybe even desperate to hire someone that they skip past certain steps in their review of that person as a potential fit for the role. And they may be focused on their technical qualifications without scrutinizing their interpersonal skills. They're what some people call soft skills, but I would argue are critical skills, whether it be just basic interpersonal communication or teamwork and so on. So I think that in the interview phase, in the recruitment phase, workplace can definitely ask questions and assess a candidate on the basis of how they will behave, separate from how they will perform. And then I think once the offer is made and accepted, I think it's incumbent upon the workplace to be very explicit and clear in writing as to what the expectations are for behavior in that workplace. And of course, we are living in an age when not all of us have physical workplaces. Many of us just communicate over you know virtual channels. So regardless of whether or not there's a physical place, there is a an organizational space, even if it's online. And I think that a lot of organizations have de-emphasized the role of a manual, of a code of conduct, of a set of standards that they want to uphold for the way employees behave. And so I think it takes more than just a, single day orientation. I think it requires some ongoing training and maybe assessment to see if the person has really learned what it is that we are asking them to absorb in terms of their behavior. And then, of course, if there were to be, continued behavior that the organization did not want, there have to be some consequences associated with that, whether it be, you know, change in role, removal of from a project, reduction in pay, suspension. There are a variety of we would say sticks, but I also think that there should be carrots, some positive incentives for people who demonstrate the kind of behavior that we are seeking. When my wife and I first had children, we attended a class called positive discipline. And I remember walking in thinking, this is a ridiculous concept. It's like a contradiction. How can you have positive discipline? But without pretending to be an expert, it's essentially an orientation towards praising the behavior you like, less than criticizing the behavior you dislike or want to discourage. So by no means can we ignore misbehavior, but when we when we make a point of praising the behavior we want, that is noticeable, and it also leaves someone with a more positive feeling. And many of us want to receive recognition of one form or another. And so I think that when we see others be recognized for some of those positive behaviors, it can incentivize us to behave in the similar way.
Dr. Larry. We often encourage people to listen with empathy, but listening alone does not correct structural inequalities or unfair workplace systems. Uh, at what point must dialogue lead to redistribution of power or I would say institutional change?
Well, it's a wonderful question, Harsha, and I would be foolish if I gave you an answer across all situations and all organizations, of course, because there is such a variety. But I think that when someone brings a concern, it's very important, first of all, for them to feel fully heard. And that doesn't necessarily happen just in the course of the initial conversation. It may happen by providing a written summary of what you understand to be the issue and transmitting it to them via email and so on. And then I think it's helpful to ask for their recommendations to the extent they have any as to what action they think should be taken, while at the same time making sure they are aware that it is your prerogative and your decision and your responsibility to take some action. And so I think transparency in the action you choose to take is very important. It's important for someone to see and be aware that action is being taken, and to have some way to comment on it and the effects of it, so that if it turns out not to be the right decision, then it can be addressed later. But the other thing I would caution is that sometimes when a single individual brings a concern, they're voicing their own grievance, but it may or may not be shared across the entire organization. And so if a leader in that organization is going to take action, they need to be very aware of the extent to which this concern is shared and widespread as compared to individualized, because there are very different approaches that you would take if it is an individual concern as compared to an organizational concern. So in essence, I think that the listener needs to make it clear they understand through speech and written text. They need to assess whether this is an individual concern or a global concern, and then they need to take a course of action in full transparency and ask for input as to whether that course of action proved effective and adjust as needed.
Thank you, Dr. Larry. Thank you for being so generous with your insights today. I really enjoyed this one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harsha. I enjoyed it as well.